And welcome to part 4 of our Solar 101 class. And you're looking at me going, Erin, what's going on? Um, I'm going to do this class, I'm going to do this discussion or this talk as quickly as I can because I'm not sure how long I'm going to feel good about doing it because it might take me out this. I've got my girls, and I was out feeding them, and T was out there, and we're, splitting some kindling up for the wood stove, and I wasn't even near the feeder, but the girls, they come in, and there's a cloud of them, they're all excited, and they're feeding on the feeder, and then they fly out, and they'll go land on something, and clean themselves up before they go home, before they go back to the hive. Well, one came around and just happened to land right on my eye, and so I flinched, and in flinching, she stung me. And she stung me right on the eyebrow there, like right here. And so it hurts. It hurts like a son of a gun, and I suspect I'm going to have some swelling pretty quick. Is it already getting... It's already getting a little puffy. You can see some redness there. So while I still got my sense about me, let's have a discussion, because I might not do this again for another couple of days. While this isn't the first time. Some of you will remember, or some folks remember last summer I got one right on the cheek, and oh boy, I really swell up. So before I get to they ain't got you yet, have they? Oh. Before I get too uncomfortable and I have it in my head, because I've got everything kind of squared away as to what I wanted to say or share with you, is, alright, this is part 4. And part 3, you needed to gain the concepts of strings and series of parallel strings that are parallel to each other, and the math involved in adding the voltages in a string and the ampages in parallel series of strings. Get the verbiage right. It's something you need to do when you're building your system, is to make sure that you can do the math, and you make sure that you have what you need for sizing each portion of your system. So we've talked about connecting things and being able to size those pipelines, the wires, and we've talked about sizing our portions of our systems, our solar panels and our batteries, based on strings and series. So it's sizing. How big can this be versus how big can this be, and if we need more, how do we add more or do with less, that kind of thing, in order to still get the whole equation to work, to go from the solar panels to the end devices that are going to be your AC devices after the inverter. So the next step that we want to look at is, this is starting to feel, oh boy, I'm feeling it. The next step we want to look at is, we want to do a discussion on the 4 main components of your system, your 4 main components. And that is going to be your solar panels, your charge controller, your batteries, and your inverter. And they are in series, and that way put together in your off-grid systems. So let's talk about the solar panels for a moment. As I showed you, I had a little 15 watt here that you can have for small systems. And these solar panels are all comprised of solar cells. And those solar cells are cut to different sizes and shapes. depending upon the size. You can have tiny little solar panels, and in some cases itty bitty ones that you might have on a watch or calculator, that kind of thing, that gather light and continually charge a battery. You have itty bitty systems and big systems. And the concept you want to get through on solar panels is fairly simple. You have three main kinds. Now there's some new technology coming in, but the first main kind, or the first kinds are, the three main kinds are your multicrystalline, which is a way that they used to create the solar or the silicon cylinder, where they would grow the crystals, and as it would crystallize there would be multiple crystals, and that's when you'd look at them you'd see different facets of crystalline formation in the solar cell. They weren't as efficient as the monocrystalline. Later the monocrystalline cells came in, and they figured out how to draw out in the silicone crystallization one crystal, which made it much more efficient. And those tend to be fairly solid in their coloring. You don't see the fractal patterns in the cell itself. The other is amorphous film, which is a different technology, and for the purposes of our class we're not going to get into it very much, because they're not used as much because their abilities aren't quite that, their efficiencies aren't quite that of the multicrystalline and the monocrystalline. The amorphous films, though, are one sheet. You don't have cells, and they have the potential to be flexible. There's some other flexibility that is coming into solar panels in technology-wise that is showing some promises, but for most of the part, most situations, you guys aren't going to be using those. You're going to be looking for the better price per watt for your system, which means you're going to go for these multicrystalline or monocrystalline cells. So there is one advantage to amorphous films, and amorphous films most frequently seen are those Harbor Freight kits that they have with the 3 panels on them that are amorphous film, but they're way overpriced. Even still, they've held their price point for a long time, and they should have come down, but they don't. And they've got a cute little system, and they sell them, and that's good, and it might work for certain things, but most of you are going to want to have something bigger and better than that. Now, solar panels are going to be built with different configurations of strings and parallel strings. So you have a string, and then you have parallel strings of different sized cells. Most of them are going to be the 6-inch cells, which is the largest ones that they produce, because you want the most efficiency. Most of them are going to be that size for most of your larger projects, and for most of you, you're going to be focused on those, unless you want a small system. And I'll show you an example of the small system when I show you my my electric fence setup and how that works, and how you can build one of those. I'm losing some of my my baking soda. I keep seeing it crumble off. It's drying out. Hopefully it will suck out some of that stinger venom, and maybe I won't swell up quite that bad. We'll see. I'm likely to look pretty funny as I'm seeing. Not too bad yet. Not too bad. Usually the swelling on me doesn't kick in until 5 or 6 hours later. But so there you go, friends. You're going to want to know the parameters of your panels, how to find the panels that fit what you need based on the system that you're going to size. So the old school way of doing it used to be to put together a set of a series of strings and parallel strings in order to meet specific voltages that was necessary for certain panels. And a long time ago, the majority of that was done in and based in matching batteries, okay, in battery voltage systems from a 12 volt system to a 24 volt system and such. That's the way it used to be. But, 10, 15 years ago, we started moving into a different kind of technology, and the panels needed to get bigger, so the voltages went up into higher voltages. And because they went into higher voltages, and because we had longer runs in bigger systems, what happened was we had to change some technology. So the next component in your system is the charge controller. And I'm gonna give you 3 different examples of charge controllers in when we start looking at the different size systems that I'm using and implementing in my little homestead here. But what you want to know is that there are small, medium, and large. They're different size all the way through, and you need to find one that suits the size of your system based on, the eventual output that you need at the end when you size that system for your whole job. For me, it's a whole house system or a cabin system, and I want the ability to do pretty much everything you can do in your house. So I've sized these components, but you may size these system components smaller for different projects. So it used to be that the charge controllers were set up specifically for certain battery bank voltages, because the purpose of a charge controller is to control the charge for the batteries. Basically to protect you from overcharging, because if you just connect a solar panel to a battery and you leave it out there in the sun, and the sun cooks on that thing and bakes that thing all day long, well, you could end up hurting your battery by overcharging it. And the charge controller is designed to sense that you have put in as much as you can into that battery, and then to stop charging, to actually act as its own little reducer breaker kind of situation for charging those batteries. Make sense? Hope so. So the original charge controllers were engineered to go with the battery bank voltage setup. They would take and monitor a voltage for that, and so the input voltage that came from the panels was also matching the charge controller voltage input, so that the output would be the same. And in other words, you'd have a larger panels similar to a house panel that was configured via the cells to produce a 24 volt nominal voltage that would go into a 24 volt charge controller that would go into a 24 volt battery bank. Ready for my curveball? Here comes the curveball. Well, as these systems got bigger and bigger, we needed to handle higher voltages for different situations, different bigger systems. So eventually in the industry, they developed something called MPPT charge controlling. Multi-power point tracking. Multi-power point tracking. MPPT charge controllers. And for most of us off-gridders, we're going to that kind of charge controller because it gives us a lot of flexibility on our solar configuration, in our strings, the amount of panels we put in, and whatnot. So let me explain that. Multi-power point. That means that I can now, instead of having to match 24 volt panels to 24 volt into the charge controller to 24 volt out of the charge controller for the batteries, now I can put in different voltages. So referring back to my solar panel array, I have three strings that or three solar panels in a string. Nominally, like I said, just for the ease of the math, 33 volts plus times 3, we add the voltages, that gives me 100 volts. Now, my charge controller that's a multi-power point tracking can take that 100 volts and convert it down to the voltage of my battery bank. Either 12 volts, 24 volts, some cases 36, and possibly 48 volts, because the higher the voltage, the more pressure, the more efficient the system. So you have two different kinds of charge controllers: nominal voltage charge controllers and multi-power point tracking. Now, when I do systems, there are two things that I generally try to max out so that I always can upgrade my system. One is the charge controller and the other is the inverter. So if I can always have a large enough charge controller and a large enough inverter, I can usually have some wiggle room in the amount of panels that I'm hooking up on this end and the amount of batteries in the middle, because those two, based on my usage habits, have the ability to be bumped up or bumped down in size considering what my needs are in that system. Hope that makes sense. So the charge controller that's now a multi-power point system can take 100 volts in a string of 3 and bring that down to whatever voltage that I need to for the particular battery bank size that I have. And that battery bank size may be sized based on the particular inverter that I want. Do I want a 12 volt inverter or do I want a 24 volt inverter? There's different reasons for both, arguably in different ways. You're going to have to decide what's the best battery bank size for you. Obviously, as I stated before, the answer would be the more efficient one would be the larger voltage size, but then again, there are good reasons to have a 12 volt battery bank, because in very challenging situations and times, we could have difficulty getting batteries in, and we may need to scrounge for batteries, because I can take my system as sized as it is and I can go get several car batteries and use it as an intermediate buffer between my production and my consumption, which is the outside of the inverter end of it, my loads. I can use it as a buffer. No, I won't be able to do much at night with it because they're not deep cycle, but as long as I got a 24 volt through pass to go from the panels to my inverter, I can fudge it, per se, if you understand what I'm getting at. You got to have the deep cycles, but I could fudge it in an emergency. So I'm trying to give you some examples. More of this is cracking and falling. Whew, boy, it hurts. I'm going to tell you what, it hurts, folks. But I want to get this out for you. Now, the purpose of the charge controller is to maintain your batteries. It's just that simple. But you got to remember, you need to match input to output based on what's on either end of the charge controller. We're going to be matching all the way through. This is the design process. How much do I want for batteries? Do I want smaller input, but I want to be able to run computers all night long, and I want a huge battery system, and I need to match, you got to think through how this is working. The battery end of it is very simple. It's you set up a battery bank with the amount of amp hours, as many amp hours as you can get and can afford. After you've sized everything else, you add as much as you can to the battery bank. The battery bank is one of the last things you're going to size, unless you have a high load or high need for usage after your production. And generally, most homesteaders who are off-grid are very willing to live within the light, which means because batteries are expensive and because they are in order to get a long life out of them, they are the weakest link in your whole chain. People are more willing to go, you know what, we'll have enough batteries to do what's necessary, but we'll put more money into production, and I'll change my daily habits so that I'm doing what I need to at night, or excuse me, at day, and reducing my needs at night to just the minimum. And that's living within the light, my friends. So, battery banks will be sized based on voltage and based on the amount of amp hour cycling that is necessary for your loads, for what you need to do, for your work, lights at night. Maybe you need to run your well pump and your water for a certain amount, so you need a little bit of room in there for your amp hours. But generally speaking, you're going to try and minimize that so that you can make your batteries last as long as possible. The one note I'm going to make, and I want you to get extremely clear in your head, there are two factors about batteries that you must keep your head wrapped around. One is whatever the amp hour rating is, you're generally never going to want to deplete that more than 50%, because to do so actually damages the battery. So if you have a certain amp hour rating, you kind of need to double what you think you need for your battery bank to protect your batteries from overcycling. The last aspect of that is the life of your battery bank is the number of cycles that you put into it. Basically, your battery bank is only going to have only so many cycles, so many times that you can deep cycle that, take it down to a certain point and charge it back up before you destroy the plates, because you're chemically breaking them down and building them back up using the electrochemical process. So that's what you want to know about your batteries. Now, as far as batteries are concerned, there are multiple kinds of batteries out there. There's flooded lead acid, sealed lead acid, lithium ion. There's a whole bunch of different technologies out there. I'm going to leave it up to you to do the research on the different battery types with one statement, and that's this. I lean towards your standard flooded lead acid batteries. Either your GCs are called golf carts, which is your 6 volts, or your L16s, which are like a double tall. So if your regular battery is, so big, well, the L16s, and Trojan is a brand that, and we'll get into looking at that. Trojan is a brand that you'll find very frequently. And then you want good quality ones, and there are good quality ones, but there's different qualities even within the Trojan brand of the thickness of the plates. And the difference in batteries between a car battery and a deep cycle is the thickness of the plates. Because if you try to do what you would to deep cycle battery to a car battery, the plates are so thin you'll eat through them quickly if you try to deep cycle them, which will kill them. They just won't build back up. You can't get the plates built back up properly. So those are the two typical types of batteries that are used in off-grid that I prefer to go to, because two reasons. One, cost. They are the most most amp hours for your dollar. So to get batteries, you're looking at wanting to get as many amp hours. That's what you're sizing. That's what you're sizing your battery bank on, amp hours. Two, you want to get as many amp hours for that dollar, and because these are the most commonly produced, very common, that's going to be the go-to. The other aspect of it is on the other end is once you're done with them, finding a place to recycle them is very easy to do. I've known lots of solar folks, off-grid solar folks, have bought some very different technology. Nickel iron, those are good ones. Those are way better in long term than lead acid. They'll last longer. They'll take a bigger beating. They'll take harder deep cycles. Nickel iron are great, but their cost is way higher also. And when you're done with them, finding a place to recycle them so that you don't have a bunch of chemical waste that sits on your property that you can't do anything with, might be very difficult. So lithium ion, it's a very, very good technology, but they're very pricey, and for the cost, and it's coming down, and it might get there, and you might think it's worth it to go to that because there's different how should I say, newer technologies, and it's getting there to where that technology is getting compatible, that kind of thing. So there is that, and then there are 4 different size smaller systems. There are many potentials that you could use that don't necessarily want to go to the depending upon your system size. You may not need to go with the 6 volts. You might go with a smaller, for the fencing one, you'll see a small batteries that are good for fence chargers and other things. Or you may, for like a radio setup, you might size that battery for a Walmart Marine deep cycle 12 volt battery for a 12 volt radio system. $100 or $70 for a deep cycle battery at Walmart might be sufficient for that. So there's different sizes, but for most of your off-grid uses, for those of you who are going to be running refrigerators, freezers, lights, and electronic equipment like your computers and stuff, you're probably going to go with GCs or L16s. L16s are bigger, but they're a little bit pricier for the amp hour rating. Okay, that's general. Good quick cover on those 3. Let's hit the last one, and the last one is your inverter. There are several kinds of inverters. There is one factor about all of these inverters, all inverters that you want to pay attention to is what are you going to be plugging into them? What's your loads going to be? If it is certain loads, you can get an inexpensive square wave, and there's not many of them out there, but there's cheap ones out there, inverters, which is very harsh. It's very harsh power, but they're very cheap inverters. The next one, which is more likely that you're going to find, is a modified sine wave, which if you were to look at it, it stair steps up and stair steps down. Let's see if I can do this. Stair steps up in its wave and stair steps down. But most of you are going to want to look for a sine wave, which is a nice smooth flow of that wave. And then we talk about that in all our other videos about the wave, the function of the cycles and how smooth they are, and nature wants them to be smooth because that's what flows, is that energy. Everything's energy. Everything needs to flow smoothly. You need the smooth flow of that sine wave because your delicate electronics and electric motors need it. Because when the modified sine wave or square wave energy were to go through your electronics, it's kind of sharp, and what happens is it creates friction, and your components will heat up. And putting heat into your components is wear. It's wear and tear over time of the heating and shrinking of these components. So you want to be able to keep your stuff cool. You want things to run smoothly. So you basically want to focus on, almost all of you that are going to watch this are going to want to know, that you want a sine wave inverter if at all possible, because it's just going to be higher quality, better energy. Now let's talk about sizing it. So you got things that you need to run. Is it a electric fence? Is it a 12 volt system that this system doesn't even need an inverter at all? Or are you talking, we're talking the household stuff, lights, computers, refrigerators, and all of those items. You say, well, how do I know how big of an inverter do I need? Well, set budget aside, because, the other aspect of the questions that I ask, as I stated, I think in the second video, there's two questions I usually ask. One is, what do you want to do? What's your demand? What's your loads? What do you need to do to size the system? And then two is, how big is your budget? Now, for the purpose of this, I generally say, we're not going to talk about budget, but budget can make a determination on how big an inverter you can get based on what you can afford. So there are different sizes of inverters, and there's a ton of different manufacturers, and we're going to do some videos where I go through and we're going to look at all of these components. We're going to look at all of these in online. Actually, we're going to do a mock shopping down the road. But when you're starting to look at sizing your inverter, you're going to look at your loads. And one of the ways that is done by a lot of solar installers is they go around and they'll do an assessment of a house. What do you have in your house that's running? They'll ask you what kind of Can you get me some water, something to drink? My throat just went real dry. It's not letting me. It's supposed to let me pause. Sorry about that. You talk for 30 minutes and see how it goes. Now, I'm really feeling it. My eye looks quite red. But what a installer will do is go around your house. Thank you, baby. And talk to you about your loads, and find out how many refrigerators, freezers, lights, what your habits are. A good solar installer will say, well, what's your day like? What do? You come in here, you do this. You come in here and do that. And basically try and get a gut feeling for what you need. So let's go simple. Let's just say all I need is a small cabin that, like I've got. But Erin, it's just me. It's not more than me, and I've got one appliance. I keep everything in a chest freezer, right? And I might use a light or two at night, And all I've got is my laptop. I use that for communications in my little my little internet device, whatever that is, and that's it. Well, I'm going to go. There's not much there. That one freezer, it runs on about 80 watts. That's not too bad. Well, let's see. In the worst situation, let's say you have a light on, you have your computer on, your internet, and you have the freezer going, and everything that you're running is running. What's the most you're gonna need? Oh, a couple hundred watts. Okay, well, I could probably start with something as little as a 1,000 watt inverter. I wouldn't go smaller than that, simply because nothing is ever rated. And remember, when I tell you this, nothing is ever exactly rated for what it says it is. When it comes to the inverters, they like to think big of themselves, but they don't really work that well as perfectly as they would like to put their numbers on. They tend to round them off. Sometimes they are conservative and round down. Sometimes they don't. But you could start off with a small 800 or 1,000 watt inverter. For a small situation like that, I would recommend something along those lines. You're always going to oversize. You're always going to oversize what you want. Now, T and I, living fully off grid like this, I have 3 freezers that I use. 2 chest freezers are used as freezers, and 1 chest freezer, and I use it specifically for as a refrigerator because it is the most efficient. I can run that thing only a couple hours a day, and I don't have to leave it plugged in. I can do with so little running on that thing, it's not funny. And if I do have a good sunny day and I can let it run and run and run, I pack that thing with water jugs to act as a thermal sink, a cold store. So I can actually freeze up a bunch of water jugs and then have a rainy day like this and not run my refrigerator freezer. They are the most efficient. I recommend you always do that if you're off grid, is have chest freezers as opposed to upright freezers or upright refrigerators, because they're very efficient. So, but I've got that. I also have my power tools that I want to be able to run. So I need something that's going to be able to pull the ampage and wattage for that, for running a table saw or running my air compressor. So for me, I've got some mid-range inverters in the 2,000 range. Xantrax, the Xantrax 2,000 watts, one of the best ones. You see it in my videos, and it's a mid-range price, around $450, something like that for that. So you can start off with a couple $100 one if you have small, but if you're sizing it up. Now, there's a difference in inverters generally between their output, and that is you have your 110 output inverters that will have a range in price anywhere from $100 up to 1,000 or 1,200 or more. Generally they're going to be a little bit better price, but most of them, your 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 watt inverters, are going to be in the mid $100 range. The next level of that is, for most off-gridders, is going to be a 220 inverter, which means the output will take your voltages of your battery banks and then bump it up to 220. And you say, well, Aaron, what do you need that for? Well, generally there's only one reason, not entirely, but generally there's only one reason that I recommend that you even look at a 220 inverter, and that's for a well pump. Okay, there are a lot of homes on lots and small homesteads and whatnot that are on a well and you're not on a public water system, and most of those wells are 220 voltages because of the depth of them and having to have that voltage go down several hundred feet to get to the well pump. Now, mind you, they do make 110 well pumps, but if your well's too deep, it may not work. If you have a shallower well that's only a couple hundred feet, you might be able to get away with pulling that old well pump out, putting a 110 in, and dealing with a smaller inverter. You have to think about matching your voltages in each one of your components. But now we're talking about components on the outside of the system, which is the well pump. And this is something you have to think about too. So when we're designing these systems, again, what do you need to do? And then what's your budget? Because mostly we're just going to focus on what you need to do as to how you're sizing your system and what we're going to do here. Because unfortunately, sometimes people don't have the budget to properly size their system, and that's just a factor of the way things work. So, yeah, it's not feeling good. We're getting a little long here, but this is going to be a long class because there's a lot to discuss here. So, the purpose of the inverter is to be able to take your stored energy from your batteries. And if I didn't say it, obviously the purpose of the battery bank is to store your energy so that it's usable when you're not producing. The purpose of your inverter is to convert that stored energy that's at a low voltage back up to a high voltage and take it from DC to AC, because we were put into a electric grid system where everything was designed off of AC because of one reason, and that's voltage drop, as I explained in the first video. Maybe not in depth enough, but the point was DC loses its voltage rather quick, or loses its voltage. It loses its pressure because of the resistance of your cables, your wires and stuff. So AC overcome that because they basically Westinghouse and Bell basically wanted to put everybody on a system that they could make money with. So if you're going to send electricity out, you need AC. Who was the other ones? I'm having a brain fart on the guy who Tesla. Tesla's one of them. Tesla and Franklin, not Benjamin Franklin. Who's the other guy? Edison. Not Edison. I just said Edison, didn't I?
No, you said Tesla and Edison.
Oh, no, Westinghouse. Westinghouse teamed up with I forget the names. Anyway, the battle was this: when we were first learning how to get things fired up with electricity and using it, there was the battle between DC and AC, and DC has a drawback to it, and that's it doesn't work good over long distances. AC does. These people who had the money wanted to get us on a system that they could charge us for. So we'll produce the power because we know how to do that, and then we'll put a line into your house and then charge you for it. Where what we should be doing is everybody have their own independent system. It's much more sustainable. So the inverter is going to get sized based on basically what you need to do with it in your home or on your homestead, and there's different sizes for different systems. I'm going to give you the 3 examples that I get when we go in and looking at the different sizes, but for now I think that brings us to a conclusion on this video, and that those are the main components. There are other intermediate components, and we're going to talk about that, and that's breakering for safety. That's the ability to disconnect one from the other, and that's also got to be matched up based on voltage and ampage, and we'll get into that probably in a short video next. But this is a good one. I think we've covered a lot of things, and I guess we can wrap it up. Starting to really ache right here. got a little headache going on, but I think that should do it. So hope this is a big eye opener for you, or helped you quite a bit with your understanding of the components. Technically, I could do a day's conversation. I could talk for a full 8 hours on each topic, even more. And we're going to get into them along the way. Everything that we talk about, I will obviously add little nuggets here and there of different things that pop into my head as we go. But yeah, that should cover it for now. Let me hit the stop, and we'll catch you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.